Hello and welcome to the Kim Iversen Show. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Tonight, we're going to have another one of our excellent conversations. We're going to be talking to Dan Cohen. He is a journalist and a filmmaker, founder of Uncaptured Media. You might have seen his work. He made the documentary Killing Gaza, which was about Israel's 2014 war on Gaza. He has lived in that region. So we're going to be definitely talking to him about his time living in Gaza, his time living in the Holy Land area, however you might want to name it. There's a lot of different names that the region goes by, depending on who you talk to. He also made a second film about Israel's war in 2021 on Gaza, also called Gaza Fights Back. And he also made the 2022 documentary about Haiti, called Another Vision, which we've talked to him on this show before about Haiti and the events going on there. So he's an experienced filmmaker. He's been living on the ground places, been visiting places on the ground, and has more of the firsthand experience and firsthand knowledge. In particular, we're going to be diving in tonight about the Israel-Palestinian conflict. It's important to note that Dan is Jewish as well. So he's got a very unique experience being, very unique, I'd say, perception of the entire thing, being a Jewish American person who's lived over there amongst the Palestinians and really, truly dived into what is actually going on there. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation tonight, I think, and I hope that you enjoy it. But before we get to our special guest, Dan, tonight, I do want to tell you about Field of Greens. You guys know that I love this stuff. It is a fine powder made from dehydrated whole fruits and vegetables, and they carefully select exactly which fruits and which vegetables to put in the mix so that you get the most nutrients in the diet that you're supposed to, you're supposed to be getting all your fruits and vegetables. But I know it's really, really difficult to do, and especially when you don't have to and you'd rather eat chips and cookies and all these other things. It's tough. I get it. So Field of Greens is a great way to get all your fruits and veggies into your diet. You will feel better when you drink this. Your skin will thank you. Your hair will thank you. You'll sleep better. Your cholesterol will thank you. Everything will be better when you're getting all these nutrients in your diet. So get Field of Greens by going to fieldofgreens.com. Use the promo code Kim and get 15% off. I do recommend the lemon lime flavor. I think that tastes the best. It tastes like iced green tea mixed with lemon. Again, fieldofgreens.com. Use that promo code Kim to get 15% off your first order. All right, guys, let's get to tonight's conversation. Dan Cohen, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be with you, Kim. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, let's start off with first, where you lived over in the Middle East. You lived specifically, how long were you in Gaza?
In a 3-year period that I lived in Israel, Palestine, I lived in the Gaza Strip for 7 months total.
Wow, okay. And then where else did you live in the 3 years that you were there?
I was based, first I lived in a refugee camp called Ida in Bethlehem. Then I moved to Ramallah, the sort of neoliberal capital of the West Bank, sort of like an NGO land. And then I lived in East Jerusalem, in occupied East Jerusalem, and then back to Ramallah. And so I was moving around quite a bit, in a relatively small territory. If you have enough privilege as a foreigner to be able to pass through Israeli checkpoints and apartheid walls and barriers and this sort of thing, then you can, really cover a lot of ground.
What years were you there?
I was there 2014 to 2017. I showed up in February 2014 as my first foray into journalism. I just basically was trying to figure out what to do with myself for years and decided journalism was for me. I wanted to give it a shot, see if I could make something happen. I had developed sort of a decent knowledge of the history of the place. And as a Jewish American, it was something that resonated with me so much because I was told Israel is like this liberal paradise of diversity and multiculturalism and peace and milk and honey. And then, when I had gone there as an adult, I realized it was something different. It was something completely different. So that was just sort of the first logical place. I was very compelled to go there. And so I stayed there early 2014. 4 months later, I find myself being able to enter the Gaza Strip amid Israel's 51-day assault. And I went with Max Blumenthal. We started working together at that point, and then our initial experience there, and then my 7 months over the next 3 years in Gaza became the documentary Killing Gaza. So I really had no experience making film. I didn't really know what I was doing. I had a couple years of film photo class in the darkroom in high school. That was about all I knew. But I
Wow.
just, you know, I just did it, and
Well,
and
you
so
did a
then I
great
left.
job, by the way, because I just watched your film, the first one, which was Killing Gaza. Is that the first one?
Right, right.
Um, yeah, I watched that earlier today, and that it was very good, and it was filmed really well. I thought that for sure you had a background in filmmaking.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. No, I don't. It's just, I just felt like the content was so compelling that that would make up for any technical deficiencies. But I appreciate your compliment.
Yeah, it doesn't look
Um,
amateur. I mean, so that's really great. Well, it's odd that. So, what were you doing before journalism then? And then you decided I want to be a journalist, and I'm going to go to the hotbed of contention, like one of the most contentious areas in the world. As a Jewish man, to go live amongst Palestinians, and I definitely want to get into that here in a second. But what were you doing before journalism before you decided to do this?
Basically, I took a few years off in college to try to figure out what to get a degree in. I didn't really care to like try to get a degree so I could go make a bunch of money. It didn't really compel me. Trying to figure out like what can I do in this world that actually improves it. And when I finally graduated with a degree in regional development, so basically, either you work for like a city in the public sector or doing like real estate. I graduated in 2009, so the economy was just destroyed, and in Arizona, so the real estate
Mm.
bubble was gone. Everything was just my degree was useless. I got a job. I got an offer to drive a Frito-Lay truck in rural Arizona with a degree, and so I just basically took. I was a rock climber all throughout my 20s. I was very into rock climbing, living in Arizona around the Southwest, and I took that and put that into an industrial use. Did what's called rope access, where I would like hang from ropes suspended in the air. I lived in New York City and did like inspections and repairs on buildings, on
Wow.
skyscrapers and wind turbines, and
Like
I just
way
got
up
to a
there?
point.
Like you'd be dangling way up there? Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
but I mean, I was a rock climber. I was into like alpine rock climbing and stuff, so it didn't really, that it felt much safer. In fact, it's much statistically, it's way safer than the rock climbing I was doing, and I so it didn't feel like scary. And once you get used to that, you know what you're doing. You understand the technical aspects to it. It's just a job, and so sometimes it's really
Anybody who's
exciting.
going to dangle from a skyscraper, I think is kind of nuts. And and
My
so
mother would agree.
yeah, and so maybe that's why you were like, and I'm going to go insert myself into a war zone. Like you might have you have like no filter for danger. It seems like it's just like what danger? Danger what danger?
I mean, I just, I always felt like it's all about mitigating risk and kind of, there's little bits you accept, but I mean, if when I was a climber, if I didn't have my harness on with ropes and I was on the very edge of a cliff, I would be scared like anyone. But it's like driving a car. You're hurling down the highway at 60 miles an hour in a hunk of metal. But once you understand you have a seatbelt on, you have gas, you have brake, you have honk, it's pretty what we do every day and take it for granted. So it was kind of like that. But, I just got to a
Okay.
point where it didn't motivate me anymore. And I was 28 years old, approaching 30, and I just wanted to do something more with my life. And so finally, I just decided, you know what? Maybe journalism is it. Like, you got to be, I thought you have to be so smart to do this. And I don't think of myself that way, but I'm just going to do it. And if it doesn't work, I'll go for a few months and it's an experience and I come back. And, it turned into something. Here I am a
Wow.
decade later. So,
So when you decided in your first journalistic adventure was to go and move to a refugee camp in Palestine in the West Bank, why did you choose that particular place? Did you know anybody there? I mean, what was the thinking for picking
um,
that place?
Yeah, Ida refugee camp is kind of a special place in the sense that it's one that's relatively easy to access for foreigners. You can go there, you can meet people. They're very warm. There's often a kind of a sort of a, not always rotating, but there are often, a few foreigners who come there, Palestine solidarity activists, journalists, young journalists who are really trying to get their feet wet, and you can go live there and you just get this experience of the occupation in a very up close and personal way on a daily basis. I mean, it's right up next to an Israeli military base. Um,
Hmm.
at Rachel's tomb, at this holy site, Rachel's tomb, which is surrounded by an Israeli military base. And on a daily basis, the gate from the refugee camp opens. Soldiers will just, come out and shoot tear gas, shoot people. They've killed kids. They'll shoot rubber coated bullets. And so you just, yeah, I mean, there's just no way to escape it. It's like you're living in like a cage where these people are treated like rats, and they're just, it was a very radicalizing experience for me, just seeing what this actually meant. And they've been living there for decades and decades and decades. So yeah, I mean, it's an accessible place, but that's what I needed.
So you chose this camp. Did you know anybody when you went?
I had met some sort of aspiring journalists, solidarity activists who ended up getting me a room. So I stayed with like the foreigners in a house in like sort of like an apartment
Hmm.
that one of the families rented out.
Hmm. When you were there, as a Jewish American, how did the soldiers treat you? How did the Israeli soldier? A lot of them are Americans. Did you run into American IDF soldiers, and
Oh yeah,
what was
oh
their
yeah.
response to you?
There was one time. I mean, usually they don't know. I'm just some guy. They can't tell. Um, there was one time that I was in the village of Nabi Saleh, which is known for its resistance. It's where Ahed Tamimi, remember her? She went, she became very famous some years ago. For she's like a young, now she's a young woman. She was like maybe 16 or 17 at the time, maybe even younger, where she slapped a soldier who was in her village. I mean, her family has been completely terrorized, killed by the Israeli army. And Nabi Saleh was like a place of weekly demonstrations. Every Friday, they would demonstrate and go confront the army and this kind of thing. Um, I went there, and one time the border police are basically, they can stop you and arrest you. The army can't quite as much as a foreigner. The border police stopped me, or a bunch of border police and soldiers. They stopped me and a few other people, two Palestinians, myself, one other a journalist, and an American journalist. And they take your ID and everything. And I had this hat, this protective hat. It was made of hard plastic. It just looked like a regular hat, but the cap was made of hard plastic, because they shoot rubber coated bullets, and that would protect me at least from that. So I'd wear that in the field. And they took my ID, and these soldiers, are all 19 years old. I'm about 10 years older than them. They take my ID and they see it, and they're just like shocked, and they're you could just see they were like glaring at me like, you traitor. So I mean, the only
Hmm.
thing that Zionists hate more than Palestinians are anti-Zionist Jews, because they see them as like race traitors. Like, you're an enemy from within. How dare you? It's
Hmm.
even more disgusting. So, um, but overall, I didn't get a lot of that. When I remember when I'd go into the Gaza Strip, you have to go. Of course, Israel controls the entrance and exit, and so when I would go in, I remember people would, the Israelis who like control it, would who look at my passport and my visa and my press card, they would look at me kind of like I'm crazy. I remember a young Ethiopian woman, Ethiopian Israeli, looking at me and just being like, "Are you scared?" And I was like, "No, are you scared?" And she just, was kind of blown out by the whole thing. But I mean, I never had any problems because I'm Jewish. I mean, not that I advertised it, and certainly like if I went around, wearing a kippah, that could be a different thing, a yarmulke,
Yeah.
that could be a different thing, because the thing is, for Palestinians, their to- their occupier calls themselves the Jewish state. When those tanks roll in, there's a Star of David on it. When there's, Israeli warplanes are dropping bombs on them and massacring them, they're saying we're doing this in the name of Jews. So you
Hmm.
have to expect that not everyone is going to be like, no, 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 this is not Jews. Like there's gonna be a reactionary element of that, and that's not to say that's not anti-Semitism in the sense of like European, old school anti-Semitism, where they really like have all these horrible beliefs about Jews. That's just a reaction to occupation. So,
Hmm.
so I didn't. It's not like I advertised it, but I mean, among people who knew, never had a problem in Gaza. Hamas knew. You think Hamas didn't know I was Jewish? Of course they did. In
Hmm.
fact, they gave me extra protection because I'm Jewish, because they knew, well, there's people who might not quite understand. Um, One time in Gaza, I don't know if I've ever told this story publicly. One time in Gaza, I went with a friend to the rubble of this neighborhood east of Gaza called Shujaiya, which now is getting hit so hard in this current war on Gaza, and it did in 2014 too. And I'm just talking to these salt of the earth people, and it's just it's an amazing experience. They're just so real. And I asked my friend, I'm like, do you think we should tell them I'm Jewish? Like, I just want these people to know the truth about me. And he was like, okay. And so we told them, and they were like, oh, especially the father, because he worked in Israel for years and years and years. He's like, oh, I have Jewish friends, blah, blah, blah. He's going off. And then a couple days later, I actually got called into Hamas's security office. And they were like, you cannot tell people that. Do not do that, because you're going to get yourself in a bad situation, because you never know how people are going to react. They might
Hmm.
not differentiate. So Hamas protected me as a Jew.
Yeah, that's interesting. Um, did you feel like, I mean, besides that experience where Hamas says, maybe it's not the best idea, and I had a similar experience when I was traveling around the West Bank and had numerous Palestinian guides, but one in particular said that he had protected a Jewish, that he could see that there was an IDF soldier who was on his way home who like went the wrong way and was lost. And he was like, oh crap, this is not going to be good. And so he went up to the car and, banged on the door and was like, get out of here. And I'm going to help you get out of here. Because if you get caught in the wrong, wrong people come around, they're going to potentially take out their anger on you. And that's not going to be a good thing. And so this Palestinian man was like, we got to get you out of here. And so I think that it's interesting that there's obviously in the region, tensions are very, very high. Same thing, I think, on the Israeli side, right? You're going to meet Israelis who are completely embracing of everybody and they love everybody and they don't have any negativity towards Palestinians and they would never hurt a Palestinian. But then you've got the ones that would. And they're very blatant and open about that. And so if a Palestinian found themselves in the wrong neighborhood, it would be a very similar thing. So when you were there, did you experience? I mean, what are your thoughts on that in particular?
I think largely Palestinians don't have like a built-in, animus towards Jews or really anyone else as part of their sort of national identity, because of course there were Palestinian Jews, there were the Palestinian Christians, Palestinian Muslims. There's all kinds of people that make up the Palestinian nationality.
Yeah.
Israel is a specifically Jewish, it is for Jews. I mean, there is a Palestinian minority among them, but those are the people who just simply, managed to not get ethnically cleansed in 1947, 48, when Israel was founded. And so in Zionist ideology from the very beginning has been Jews only. Jewish state is Jewish demographic majority, and so they're taught Zionism. The very ideology of Zionism is that there's it's Jewish supremacy.
Mm.
So the vast majority, you have like liberal Zionists who will be like, well, we just want them over there as long as they stay on the other side of the wall. It's fine, and they keep quiet, stay in those refugee camps, stay quiet, and stay quiet. Great, I don't have any problem with them. And then you have you have the sort of Zionist left, which is the Israeli left, believes in apartheid, and the Zionist right is no, ethnic cleansing. Get them out of here. That's all our land. So you have a tiny minority in Israel of Israelis, of Jewish Israelis, that are totally anti-racist, are totally anti-Zionist, reject this whole supremacist ideology. But I mean, they are a very, very small fringe, and so racism is rampant throughout left and right in Israel, where it's just not really there among Palestinians.
Did you? That was my experience as well. When I was in Palestine, I noticed one thing is that they never really pointed out and said those Jews, like Jews. It was always occupier. They don't. They were
Right.
using that term. It was occupier or colonizer. It was occupier, really. I mean, they just say the occupiers, the occupiers. There's an occupier. They don't point him out and say these are Jewish people. That was my experience, but maybe you had a different one. You were there
Yeah,
for a
I mean,
really long time.
the Arabic word that you hear, on a daily basis, al-Aktilal, like you hear it all the time from Palestinians, and that's just the reality. That is the primary contradiction that they face is the occupation, and so that's what they talk about. You will hear, Palestinians say Yahud, which means Jew, but as I was saying before, that means they're occupied. They're not saying that I hate, Jews in America or Jews in Europe or whatever else, Jews in Ethiopia. It's that they hate their occupier, and for very good reason. But Zionism wants them to conflate Jew and Zionist,
Occupier.
or right, yeah, Jew and occupier,
Yeah.
exactly. So Zionism uses Judaism as a human shield.
Hmm.
And like, if you go into, especially young, among the younger generations in Gaza, for example, you will hear Yahud all the time because they have never actually met a Jew who was, because they've been under siege their whole life, since it's been
Hmm.
under siege since 2005. They've never left this tiny strip of land. They've never met a Jew. So, they don't have any positive experiences where, like, that older generation, well, at least they used to work in Israel. And even though it was still, they're the underclass who's coming to do labor at very low wages, there's still like some bit of humanization where the only Jews that a 20-year-old Palestinian will ever met are like soldiers who are coming in, or dropping bombs on them. So like,
Yeah.
what can you expect?
Yeah, and that's what's really unfortunate, I think, about what's gone on over there is that the younger generations seem to be more radicalized than the older generations because they've now been separated since the building of the wall, since they've been really kind of blockaded into Gaza, and same thing with the West Bank. It's that the young people they just haven't had much intermixing and interaction, and when you have groups of people who don't ever meet and and it's like the difference between people and how they talk online at each other. People will just be savages online because they've never actually seen. But then, if they met that person face to the person that they're calling all kinds of names on social media and being a jerk to, if they actually sat down and had a conversation with them in person, they wouldn't treat them that way. They would see that this is a person and they have different viewpoints, and we can have a normal conversation. And it's not. But when you dehumanize because you don't have that interaction, right? Then it becomes really visceral. It becomes really hateful, and that is, I think, super sad about what has gone on over there with that younger generation in particular. Um,
Uh,
where else did
yeah,
you?
absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hmm. No, no,
Did you?
no, absolutely. You're
Yeah,
you're you're completely right. I mean, and it's that is the reason for that is just purely apartheid.
yeah,
Keeping people apart from each other so they can't see each other as human. 100%. Um, even, I mean, it's the same for Israelis. They don't want to see, Zionists do not want to see Palestinians. Even going back to the before the founding of the state, before the ethnic cleansing, the whole idea of the Jewish Labor Party was that it would be Jewish labor only. Like,
hmm
we don't want Arabs doing our work. We don't want them around, like, at all. So, I mean, it's like built into Zionist ideology from the start.
So, you lived in Gaza for 7 months.
Yes. Yep. I mean, I would basically. I would go back and forth. I had like an apartment in East Jerusalem for a while. I had in a neighborhood called Beit Hanina. Um, I had an apartment in Ramallah for a while, and I would go to Gaza for 5, 6 weeks at a time. 3, 4,
Mm.
5, 6 weeks at a time and film. I'd go in the winter to film. I mean, the whole idea is that I wanted to report there. I mean, basically I saw Gaza as like the story that very few are paying attention to. There are a lot of journalists who would go and cover like the West Bank and go to the
Hmm.
demonstrations, and it's easier to access. But I was so fortunate to get an Israeli government press card, which allowed me to go into this ghetto. And I just saw this as like, I am documenting history. It's like as if I had access to the Warsaw ghetto. I mean, the level of suffering and dehumanization these people are living, and it's just like it's almost like an untold story. Like people, at least what I saw, and 2014 was unprecedented in the scale of the Israeli mega assault. Entire neighborhoods wiped out, people, digging bodies from the rubble like they are now. And I just felt so compelled. It's such a severe reality. And so I just tried to spend as much time as I could. But there were other stories that I felt like were kind of equally important around Jerusalem too.
Hmm.
Um, so the film Killing Gaza. It's the 2014 war, but it's also the aftermath. Like when all the foreign correspondents leave, and people are just living in the rubble, totally abandoned, living in shipping containers at best, um, living in total trauma, living through the winter, the freezing winter, where in the documentary you see a baby freezes to death because its house was destroyed. In the summer, people just living in sweltering heat. That's just you know in on the Mediterranean, on the beach in the Mediterranean. So in a shipping container with no kind of airflow. So it's just I just felt so compelled by that I just spent
Yeah.
as much time there as I could. Yeah.
Did you spend much time in Israel proper, like Tel Aviv? Did you spend time amongst the Israelis and get their opinions and viewpoints of what was going on?
Oh, very much. Absolutely. I spent I mean, a lot of time in Tel Aviv. I didn't live there, but to go from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv is like an hour bus ride,
Hmm.
so or really less, from maybe door to like door to door from a friend's place from my place to a friend's place in Tel Aviv is like an hour. And I had a
Hmm.
car for a while, so it could be even less. So I would go there and stay for days at a time. I spent a lot of time in Tel Aviv, particularly covering sort of the Israeli right wing rallies at various periods, the anti migrant, their uh, uh, Eritrean and Sudanese refugees in Israel, and I was covering that. They are just hated by the Israeli public. They were living in a park, and then they were also living in a place called Holot, was in the south of Israel. Wouldn't They were interned there. An Israeli government official called it a concentration camp, where they were only allowed to leave during the day, but they had to sleep there at night. And it was out in the middle of the desert, so they couldn't go anywhere. Um, so, I mean, I covered that, and very closely following the Israeli, right wing. When there were during the 2014 war, before I was able to go into Gaza, I was going to these um, fascist rallies where they're saying, they're chanting Gaza is a cemetery. There's no school in Gaza tomorrow because all the children are dead. I mean, just a total celebration of mass murder. So I got to know the Israeli right wing very well, not only around Tel Aviv in this supposedly like liberal bubble, but also in Jerusalem, in the settlements. I mean, I was just really all over the country because it's such a small place. And if you're there
Right.
for 3 years, you can do a lot.
Yeah. So when you come from one side of it just by birth, by being a Jewish man, right? So did you go on birthright, by the way? Did you ever do any of that?
Yeah, so I I took a history class in college, and that was really, basically what opened my eyes. I was like reading Chomsky and these kinds of things, and then I just decided, well, I have to take a critical approach to Israel. And so I took a class, and I just started. I remember reading about basically destruction of villages by Zionists, and I was just shocked. Like, we did what? This is completely new to me. And I say we, meaning thinking like, well, that's us, that's the Jews, that's me. This is my country, right? Like,
Right.
but of course, it's not my country, and I never was a Zionist. I don't have anything to do with it. But it's the way they I was taught growing up in my synagogue,
Hmm.
where your culture becomes like be pro-Israel, because there's not much like religious theology taught in Reform Judaism. It's a lot of it's just like be pro-Israel, and so when I when I finished college, a friend of mine was trying to get me to go on Birthright, and I was like, you know what? I want to go see the occupation, and the only way I would go on Birthright was if I go see the occupation, and I think it backfired on Birthright pretty well at this point. So I went for 10 days on this trip, and it was very, I felt very, it was very fascist. I remember at one point I got the whole group. We're supposed to like give some presentation about what we did on Shabbat, and I talked about some guy I met who I asked what should be done about Gilad Shalit, or what should the Israeli government have done. And this was an Israeli soldier who had been captured by Hamas in 2006, released in 2011. I asked him something like that, and he said, just bomb all of their neighborhoods, just bomb all of the neighborhoods. I was just like in shock. This is genocide you're talking about. So that was like on Birthright. And then afterwards, I stayed and I went to the West Bank. I went to East Jerusalem, neighborhood called Sheikh Jarrah, which, of course, there were big demonstrations there a couple of years ago. And I went to Hebron. I think you've been there, right?
Hmm.
I mean, you
Yeah.
see like this shocking apartheid. Like, this is just pure racial apartheid. And it's
Yeah.
just what American sees that and thinks like, this is a good model. This is a liberal paradise. That this is inclusive. So at that point, it was just like it was done. I'd seen it.
So do you, when you hear the Israeli side of the arguments now, after having lived there amongst the Palestinians, witnessing the occupation, talking to them, getting to know them intimately for 3 years. I mean, that's a long time to be there. That's, you're really getting to know people. You're making friends. You're hearing the conversations. You're hearing, even if they get really angry, and you're going to hear all of the conversations if you spend that kind of time there. So when you hear there's a lot of course, I hear from my Israeli friends, from my Jewish friends, or just from my pro-Israel friends, right? They'll say, well, but they want to kill us all. They want to kill all the Jews. They want us gone. If we're fighting, what we see a lot is the phrase, like, if they stopped fighting tomorrow, there would be peace. If we stopped fighting tomorrow, we would be exterminated, right? Like, that's what we hear a lot. From what you heard, I mean, as you mentioned, there is, like, even Hamas pulled you aside and said, don't tell people you're Jewish, and the wrong people find out, you're going to have a problem. And, we do know that there is animosity. I mean, massive amounts of anger, hate even. What is your feeling on what the Jewish side, what the Israeli side says about the conflict? Do you think that they have any merit to some of their defense at all?
No, I think it's just pure projection. I mean, the idea that if Israel stopped, was not like if the Palestinians just laid down their weapons. I mean, the Palestinians in the West Bank don't really have weapons largely. I mean, there's in Jenin, there's the Lion's Den, which is a recent resurgence of armed resistance. There have been pockets of it, but overall, I mean, you have the Palestinian Authority, which is a collaborator regime funded by the United States, trained by the United States, that does the dirty work of Israel. So, I mean, it's not like they're just not fighting. It's like they're actually doing Israel's work. And yet, Israeli settlements still expand. The Israeli military is everywhere. So it doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
I mean, it's the thing that they won't admit is just the simple fact that there is, they want to pretend to have some kind of moral high ground. It's this superiority, like we have to do this because they don't want peace, as if, they have a choice. The simple fact is, you have one people that is superior according to the system and one that is inferior. And as long as that is the case, there will be resistance from the subhuman class,
Right.
and the overlords will try to enforce that system until the whole thing collapses, largely, I think, because of the internal contradictions of the superhuman class, of Israel, its own internal
Mhm.
contradictions. So no, I mean, I don't think those arguments hold any water. They're just tired Hasbara talking points that, like, I mean, a lot of Israelis believe, but I think what happens is when you are an occupier, when you're a bully, you believe yourself to be the victim because you need that in order to justify it. So, Israelis like see themselves as this little, tiny strip of land in the sea of hostile Arab Muslim horde countries. And why can't they just give us? Meanwhile, they're bombing their neighbors all the time. It's stolen land. They committed ethnic cleansing. It's just like there's a total cognitive dissonance that they refuse to recognize. And if you do begin to recognize it, if you do examine it, like I did as a, college student, we did what? That kind of thing, then there's only one place that you can arrive if you're an honest person. And it's not liberal Zionism that we stay on our side and they stay on their side. And if they start to act up, we go in and pound them. It's no, we need, like, we have to have equality. Supremacy is a system that fails to protect really anyone, and especially the lower, the victims of it. So no, I mean, all of these arguments are just so bogus and hollow to me.
What about the arguments of, well, if we just had a one people or one state solution now, forget being gay. Like you're not going to be allowed, they're saying that this is a liberal place. I find this argument, by the way, so funny. I mean, because for one, I'm hearing it mostly from these real staunch conservative Republicans who are defending Israel, right? But they're the very people who would vote against gay marriage if given the
Right.
opportunity here in the United States. But a lot of them will say, well, try being gay in Palestine. And I'm like, try being gay in a conservative state in America, 20, 30 years ago. I mean, maybe things are definitely, I think, better today, but you go back to just a few decades, I mean, even my lifetime, and things weren't so friendly for people who came out and lived in very conservative areas of this country. So what do you make of that, of these arguments that, well, but the Palestinians, Islam, it's very conservative, it's backwards. We wouldn't have this liberal democracy, this liberal freedom that we have in Israel. Again, pointing out the irony of a bunch of conservative Republicans championing a liberal democracy, in the Middle East that allows for gay rights and gay parades and abortion, right? But putting that aside, what do you make of that argument?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you correctly point out, how hypocritical and phony it is, and kind of hilarious. Like they want, I don't know, they want like Jewish Israeli they want like drag shows for like Jewish Israeli kids to show like this is why we have to support apartheid.
Right.
But of course, they freak out, and I mean, about that stuff in the United States,
Hmm.
right or wrong, whatever you think about it. Um, so you know, is Gaza a paradise for gay people? Of course not. It's a very conservative place culturally, and you have a resistance movement that is Islamic in nature. So, but it is nonetheless a resistance movement, and the reason Hamas exists is because of the need to resist. It's not complicated at all. Occupation breeds resistance. So end the occupation, and then there's no more resistance, and space will open up. Whether Palestinians want to go that route, and allow that to sort of flourish, well, I mean, I think in some ways it wouldn't look. you know where there's where you can be more openly gay among Palestinians? In Ramallah.
Hmm.
Ramallah is the neoliberal capital which has zero sovereignty. It is a complete creation. I mean, it was a Palestinian tiny Palestinian Christian village that when the peace accords, the Oslo process happened in the mid '90s, it grew massively, and it's just all sustained by foreign money. And so you can go to like bars and drink beer and cocktails and have like foreign fancy foods. And I lived there, and I went there. I went to those places, and I had a good time with my friends, my local friends there. And you can totally be gay. There are plenty of gay people there, but I think it sort of says something about this neoliberal model that you can live as like without any kind of rights. You can live under occupation and like be gay, and that's the best occupation that you're going to get. Whereas if you resist, like Gaza does, then you're going to get more conservatism. As like it's
Hmm.
like if the United States was under occupation by some foreign country, I think like people in the heartland of the U.S. are going to, it's those are the people that are going to resist. It's not like the latte sipping like liberals in New York City who are going to be
Right.
like, I'm getting my gun and I'm defending my land. It's like, no, they're going to be the collaborators. That's who the elites are. Um, so I mean, it's just another just one of these hollow arguments. And not only that, even for gays, for homosexuals in Israel, um, I went to the Israeli Pride March to cover it in 2000, I want to say 16 or maybe 15. And I was there when an Israeli fanatic murdered, stabbed to death a lesbian woman. Um, and
Uh,
he had been let out of jail. He'd committed a similar hate crime, and he had been let out of jail by the police. Very early, total lenient sentence, and they just let him go to this pride parade, and he murdered someone. I'm trying to remember the young woman's name is Shiri something, but I mean, are we going to say that's a paradise? Is
mhm.
that not similar to horrible things that have happened, in the United States? So to pretend that it's some kind of uh, gay, LGBTQ paradise is totally absurd.
Yeah. Right. I think there's no doubt that the Palestinian people, today are more conservative than Israelis. At least that's, when was over there, that was kind of obvious to me that that Islam is a conservative, like all religions are conservative. And if you actually practice your religion, you're going to be conservative versus those who say they're Catholic, for example, but then they're like off drinking, partying, doing whatever they want, right? Like you've got those that actually practice Catholicism and then those that just were born Catholic. So I think, of course, when people practice their religion, they're going to be naturally more conservative, and you're going to get that for sure. But, I always found that argument a bit funny for the reasons that I mentioned, the hypocrisy of it, but also just in the 1950s, it's not like things were great for women in this country. I mean, women couldn't have bank accounts in the 1950s without their husbands, and women really weren't in the workforce except secretaries and teachers. I mean, we've evolved as a society. We don't believe that because we were once conservative society that was, you couldn't be outwardly gay in the 50s. You couldn't get an abortion at all. Women couldn't, like I mentioned, have bank accounts. I mean, there was all of these very conservative ideas in this country, but we don't believe because we were conservative, we deserve to be bombed or like eradicated because of our conservatism, right? Like
Right.
we ultimately evolved out of the conservatism and now in some regions evolving back into it. There's always seems to be when the pendulum goes too far in one direction, it starts to pull back in another way. And our society has seen moments of liberalism and moments of conservatism. And I think a really good place to highlight that is like Turkey, for example. Like the Ottomans were like super liberal. And now under Erdogan, you're seeing like this return to conservatism in Turkey and saying, well, this is like, you guys have gone, and we see that here in this country where people are liberal, but then they're like, what but that's too liberal. And so now we need to pull it back and go into conservatism. So there seems to be this kind of pendulum shift, shifting, and we don't say bomb them. bomb them and then, eradicate the crazy conservatives. They're too conservative for us. I'm sure that there's liberals in this country that do maybe think that way, like punch the Nazis, right? That kind of that mentality of, well, we don't want them around anyway because they're dangerous. So what are we going to do about these like dangerous conservative MAGA people? Yeah, it's just but it's interesting. People don't think it through, right? Like when they're making these arguments, they're not really thinking through how would you apply that to our own society, and what were we at one point this way, and what was our solution to that? Whatever it was. So do you have friends? Do you have friends that are there now? I mean, you were living there for 3 years. Are you in contact with people who are there today in Gaza in particular?
Yeah. I'm in touch with a number of people in Gaza. I'm in touch with a doctor who's in Al Shifa Hospital, the main hospital in Gaza. Actually, the guy who filmed the second documentary I did in Gaza, Gaza Fights Back. His name is Motaz Azaiza, and he has just, transformed into a hero throughout this current war. Where when I was put in touch with him, he's a very good photographer, and he's the sweetest, just most pure guy in the world. He's almost childlike how nice and unflappable he is, and we hired him at that point to film this documentary, to do some reports on the 2021 war on Gaza, and made like a really nice piece. And I've been in touch with him, and he wasn't like famous at all. And then when the Hamas attack happened, he sent, I called him, and he said, yeah, I'm in Gaza City. I saw it. He sent me videos of the Israeli hostages being, taken through the streets on trucks. He sent me a video of an Israeli army vehicle, being driven around. And it was just like, we both knew this is going to be huge. And, I mean, it was a kind of a moment where it was like, you're just at the top of a roller coaster, and it's just starting to go down. It's just going to. So since then, I mean, Motaz has been like basically the bravest person I've ever known, bravest person I've ever seen. If you saw, he's on Instagram, where he now has like 3 million followers or something. He's posting videos on a daily basis of massacres. His own family was massacred. He showed up to document it, and turned out it was his own father's side of the family. 15 of his family members died. There was a video where, I mean, he filmed himself. He went with an ambulance. He went with medics, and he ended up carrying a dead baby. And he filmed it, and he's just carrying this dead baby and crying. And it's just like, I don't know, I'm trying to like not get emotional. But it's just, my friend Motaz is just a hero, and I just like pray that he lives.
Yeah. It's just really terrible.
Everyone there. Yeah. The doctors too, I mean, these are just like, for me, these are just like heroes who will be, forever known in history, no matter what happens to them. And I just pray that they survive.
Yeah, I mean, war is absolutely terrible. When we hear from the Israeli side that, well, Hamas uses these people as human shields, or that Hamas won't let them evacuate, or that we hear, or that they're all just supporters of Hamas. So they're basically all targets because they're all Hamas in a way by supporting them. What is your response or reaction to that? Is there any truth to any of this?
Okay, so sort of in order. Regarding human shields, it's totally false that Palestinians use each other as human shields. Number one, there is an Israeli military procedure called of using human shields, called the neighbor procedure, where you just, if you want to go into someone's house, you get the neighbor, and you force them to go in first. and probably, they won't want to shoot their neighbor. And so that's how you go in. It's completely common. The Israeli human rights group B'Tselem has a whole paper on it. I mean, that's not a secret at all. There was even an Israeli, I believe, Supreme Court injunction. They told the military, yeah, you got to stop doing this human shield stuff so much.
Mm.
So, in Israeli society, it's in Israeli military, it's like, of course they do. It's just a propaganda claim that they don't. I myself, in fact, was used as a human shield by Israeli soldiers when I was living in Ida refugee camp. I basically the youth of the camp decided to tear a hole in the apartheid wall. They have this massive wall right next to them, lined with um, pillboxes, and so I was out documenting this for like 3 days. It's right outside my front door, and so they tear a hole in the wall. The army comes in, shooting tear gas and shooting, rubber coated bullets and live ammunition at all these young guys and kids. And at one point, I was kind of close to the Israeli army where they were shooting. I was off to the side where they were shooting direct, and they were shooting at Palestinian, basically kids with slingshots that were shooting marbles. So it could do real serious damage to, if you hit somebody. And an Israeli soldier, like the commander of the unit, forced me at gunpoint to go stand in front. So, as if to get me hit or to make them stop shooting, like they're going to stop, flinging marbles in their slingshots. And so, they made me stand there, and along with two other Palestinian journalists. And eventually I just kind of like, ran away. Um, and then later that night, the Israeli soldiers were still there at night, and I was out taking photos, and they came around the corner, found me, started shouting at me, held me at gunpoint against the wall. I put my chest up against the wall, my arms, and then they said march, and so I start walking away, and it's very, very dark, and they threw what's called a flashbang right in front of me. A flashbang is like something that explodes, makes an extremely loud sound and a big flash. So it's like when you want to disperse a crowd, you throw one of those. And so they threw that at me and laughed and walked away. And my ear was ringing for like, I couldn't even hear out of one of my ears for days. So, I mean, this is just standard Israeli military practice, to the point where they even do it to foreign journalists. I mean, we documented it in our documentary, Killing Gaza. Max and I filmed um, multiple testimonies of people who said they were used as human shields. They laid out the exact same thing. Testimony is consistent. It's just like there's no question, 100%. Israel regularly uses human shields, and Palestinians, I've never seen a shred of evidence. It doesn't even make sense. Um,
Hmm.
so that's that one. The other question you had about, Hamas is Palestinians, that sort of thing. From a legal perspective, that's absolutely false. Of course, you have to differentiate between civilians and militants,
Hmm.
which Israel does not. And you see Israeli politicians saying, Moshe Feiglin, a member of the Likud party, Netanyahu's party, on television 2 days ago. I put this clip out on my outlet, Uncaptured Media. He says, annihilate, kill, destroy everything. There's no question. It's just genocidal speak. Like, there's no difference between, for Hamas is just a euphemism for Palestinian in the like Zionist mindset. Um, so so basically, Palestinians are forced to adopt that mentality, in the sense that, look, Israel doesn't differentiate between any of us. We're all locked in here together. Um, the resistance, so we're all resisting in our own way, whether you choose to take up arms or not, or maybe you don't choose to resist, but your
Hmm.
existence is basically resistance.
Hmm.
And so, people support resistance. Basically, pretty much everyone supports resistance. When you go, if you go and talk to Palestinians, not only in Gaza, you go in the West Bank, you get people, who will speak openly. You go talk to Palestinians in Nazareth, or in what they call 1948 Palestine, in modern day Israel, Jerusalem. everybody basically supports resistance. There's a tiny few who have more of a collaborator mentality. So in Gaza, when everyone is considered all the same and they're bombing everyone supports resistance. So at that point, it's like the people are the resistance and the resistance are the people. The resistance only exists because it draws from the people. It's a very genuine, real expression of human dignity. And you can, I mean, in terms of, I think it's important to address what the resistance did on October 7th to those Israeli kibbutzim, communities, settlements. I am horrified by any human death. Absolutely. It doesn't, none of that change. Civilians were killed, children, I understand. I mean, we still don't know exactly what happened. And there is, in some ways, there is a recording that the Electronic Intifada published of a now censored interview of an Israeli woman saying that a lot of the Israelis, she saw Israelis being killed in firefights. So it's not as if it was just a massacre. It's that the
Mm-hmm.
Israelis just came in, when they were like Palestinians were Hamas had them held up in houses and just opened fire, and so killed a bunch of Israeli civilians. So there's a lot of questions about what actually happened. Nonetheless, I think it's very safe to say that some civilians were killed
Mm-hmm.
by Hamas. So none of that can all be true. It doesn't change the fundamental fact that it's Israel's fault for keeping people locked in a cage, bombed out, starved, dehumanized, treated like animals, and then you see a reaction. And knowing that they have a very strong militant group that has a very huge system of tunnels and capabilities and rockets, and then they have these settlements right on the other side of this fence with the softest of targets, with families, with little kids, a music festival full of young people, many of which are also soldiers because Israel conscripts all their young people. It's mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's almost like aren't you kind of tempting these militants to, go after? Couldn't you say that Israel is using its own people as human shields against these Palestinians? I think that's completely a fair argument, and I look at it, as the same as any kind of revolutionary violence. What would happen if the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto escaped and went and killed a German family? Would we 50, 100 years later say, well, actually, maybe the Nazis were not so bad? We would say, no, war is horrible, war is hell, but that doesn't change the fundamental power imbalance.
Yeah.
Same with the Haitian Revolution. The Haitian Revolution was very bloody. Every revolution is bloody. It's not pretty, but what you get after it, people treasure and they believe is important. How do we think of our revolution here in the United States? It's you think that was nice? What did the North do to the South? Burn down villages everywhere, but everyone pretends, it's or believes that it was absolutely justified, absolutely worth it. So, I mean, it's you can be horrified by human death, but you cannot decontextualize it.
Right. That seems to be happening a lot with this conflict in particular. Is this? It seems to be, I think, the question of this conflict in so many different ways is who started it, right? So there's this question of who started it. A lot of people are pointing at Hamas and October 7th and saying they started it. We were just living our lives. We were just at a music festival doing what we were doing. And then Hamas breaks out, which then you have to ask the question, well, what were they breaking out from, right? And why were they in some place where they had to break out, first of all, like prisoners? But they broke out and they caused a massacre, undoubtedly. And then now Israel is, so basically the Palestinians started it. So there's this, but then of course, then you say, well, but did they? Because these people are locked in a cage. And so of course they're going to break out. You've got all these innocent people and maybe some not innocent people, but they're still in this prison and they're bound to want to get out. and they're going to get out. And when they do, what do you expect them to do when they get out? They're very angry that you put them in this place for a really long time. And then even if you go before, when the people were blockaded into Gaza, and you go back, to 1967, and you go back to 1947, 1948, and you go back to 1919 or what, right? You could keep going back, but then the story continues, right? Because what we hear then is, okay, there might have been this like Herzl Zionist movement that started in the late 1800s, because that's where a lot of us would start the conflict. That's where I personally would start it, is I started at the modern era of when there was just people living on the land, and then there was this mass influx of immigrants that came in. And as the immigrants started pouring in, the issue, from what I can tell, is that the immigrants were accepted at first, but then people caught wind of what the immigrants were saying, right? And what they were saying is, we're going to take this land for us. And and it's not for the people that live here. This is our birthright. We belong here. God said 2,000 years ago, this is ours. And so we're going to take this land. And even that's really kind of a disputed point, because Herzl himself was not religious, yes, he was by birth Jewish, but he didn't believe in all the God stuff. So there's a lot of them that came onto the shores, and they weren't really even saying, they were kind of using as an excuse, God said 2,000 years ago, this was ours, so hightail it out of here, buddy, right? Like you're just living on my land, and you've been living here for a few hundred years, but this was mine 2,000 years ago. Even though they don't believe that, because they're not even religious. They were completely like atheist, just ethnically Jewish, but atheist in religion. So that's kind of also an interesting point. But many of us would start it at when the mass influx, like that's when it starts. But a lot of people would say, no, that's not where it begins. It goes back to the Roman times, right? It goes back to when the Jews were forced out of the land. And it just seems like this is the biggest issue with this conflict, is where do you begin? Because so many will begin at the Romans, or they'll begin at the mass push of eradicating Jews from the region, right? All of these various different time periods. And I guess then the question is, what's reasonable? Like, where's the reasonable place to start this conflict? Do we start it October 7th, just a week ago, or do we start it 2,000 years ago?
Do you remember in February 2022 when the West suddenly realized that there had been a war raging in Ukraine for, 8 years? And suddenly, oh my God, Russia did what? They invaded an unprovoked invasion? And for those of us who pay attention to reality, we knew that there had been a war raging in Ukraine, and that the fascist government that came to power because of a coup orchestrated by the United States, was this government was waging war on the Donbass, on the Russian-speaking population that identifies with Russia. So, welcome to reality, folks.
Right.
So I see it similarly as what happened on October 7th. Palestine's been under, Gaza has been under siege for and 18 years.
2 decades, yeah.
Yeah, almost 2 decades. The only time they'll talk about it is when some rockets come out, just like the media in the West. Hey, what are they doing? What are those animals doing? They're firing rockets at us. Like, well, what do you expect? I think you're correct that the real way to look at it is, like, what is the root of this whole thing? And it's it's settler colonialism. You can't expect the natives to not resist. It's just dishonest. Even if you think that it's justified, they're gonna resist. There have been prominent Israelis who have admitted it. I think it was Ehud Barak, former prime minister, who said, if I was born a Palestinian, I would resist too. I would resist. I would take up arms against Israel too. In terms of going back to like 2,000 years ago, the irony is, Judaism spread. It's not that everyone who, like, I'm not indigenous to Palestine. At some point in the last, 1,000 or whatever years, my ancestors converted to Judaism from whatever they were before, which I have no way of knowing what that is.
Mm-hmm.
That does not mean that I am suddenly indigenous to Palestine. I'm indigenous, if you know, and if to Russia, to Lithuania. That's where my family's from.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, like 99 point whatever percent of my DNA can be apparently traced there. Um, so the idea that because I adopt a religion or a name does not give me, of course, rights to the land of where that religion originated thousands of years ago. I mean, anybody can, convert to Judaism. Judaism doesn't really proselytize anymore, but you can convert to Judaism. It's a lengthy process. So, if you, Kim, decide tomorrow that you're going to convert to Judaism, you can do that. It'll take a little while, and then you can go live in a settlement and get an Israeli passport, and suddenly you have more rights than, anybody who actually is indigenous to this land. I mean, if I change my name to, I don't know, Iversen, do I get to take over your house and kick you out? Of course not. It's completely absurd. So,
Hmm.
it's people who it's like living in some like fantasy. It's for people who are not rooted in their culture, who I think a lot of, why I see Americans who make aliyah is what they call it, who ascend, and Westerners, is because which means go to Israel, take Israeli citizenship, join the Zionist project, is because they're lost. They're living in the decadent capitalist West with some whatever job in New York City, just being like, I'm just a white person in New York. I don't have any like culture or roots. Just like, what am I doing? And because they've assimilated and lost their culture from where they actually came from, they don't know anything about like European Jewish history or whichever specific place they're from. You have to know your own history to know who you are and where you came from. But we're not really taught that. We're taught to assimilate. Don't speak your language. Immigrants. How many immigrant parents actually teach their children the language of their, where they came from? Not that many. And it's
Right.
understandable why, because they want to succeed. But it's the same with Jews. So then all of a sudden, if you don't really actually know much about Judaism, and frankly, most Americans, especially secular Jews, don't know much about Judaism, including myself, I've had to learn a huge amount in order to really be able to develop this analysis. They see, we're told Israel, Zionism, that's our land, so go, that's what it means. So like all of a sudden you go on Birthright. This actually happened with a cousin of mine, completely secular all her life. She was not even remotely Jewish. She went on Birthright when she was in college, and she came back complete fanatic and cut me off, because of my opinions, and denounced me. So like, I mean, people just, it's like they find a culture. It's very similar to like people, from the West who are like lost and join ISIS. They're like, that gives them some meaning,
Yeah.
and, so, and it plays into the worst tendencies. So that's the same thing that Zionism is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's there's definitely, I think, a lot of misconceptions about it, about the founding of the country and how it started. And I always say, like, look, just read about the history from an unbiased perspective. You can love Israel and support Israel and wave the Israeli flag all around, but definitely do your research on just getting the knowledge. And I've always been that way with everything. I mean, I was very religious for many years of my life, and I really, for me, I wanted to know the history of the religion that I joined, that I was practicing. I wanted to know even the bad things, all the dirty details, everything, because then it would help me have a discussion with somebody, even if the idea is to convert them to my way of thinking. It's that if I can counter the negative because I know the negative, and a lot of times you just can't. A lot of times it's like, bad things happen. People do bad things. I can't excuse that. I don't have an answer for that. There's just going to be some bad history here. Even if it's just from that, like, just to know these things, a person should learn the true history so that they can understand. I think, though, if a lot of people learn the history and if a lot of people spent time with the Palestinian people, I mean, my short experience in comparison to yours, I found the people to be extremely sweet, giving hospitality up, like an immense amount of hospitality, unlike anywhere that I'd ever experienced. They reminded me a lot. I had spent quite a bit of time in Italy, and they reminded me a lot of the Italians, very similar to the Italian people.
Mediterraneans,
Passionate. Yeah,
right?
very right. Mediterranean people. They reminded me of the Italians. They were passionate. They were religious. They grew olives. They were proud of their olives. This was like very much like the Italians. And the Italians have a lot of affinity to the Palestinians. I was able to go into Al Aqsa Mosque and look around, and I went with an Italian delegation. There was a delegation of Italian politicians who were there to see the occupation of Palestine, and they were very much sympathetic to the Palestinians and the plight that was going on there. And so I was with them and heard the Italians talking and whatnot. And even when you go into the mosques, you see the buildings were clearly built by the Italians, with the help of the Italians, because the marble is the same, the architecture is very, very similar. So there's a real kinship there between the two groups of people. And they were very, very similar. And I just think, would anybody ever accept like Germans showing up into Italy, or Russians? A better example would be Russians, because a lot of the Jews that immigrated into Israel were from Russian descent, USSR. So imagine like a bunch of Russians taking over Italy. Like, would people be okay with this? And maybe the Russians say, well, we're the ancient Romans, because the Romans were like blonde and blue-eyed. they weren't you. Like, we're the ancient Romans, and we're going to come and take it over. People would say that's wrong. We wouldn't agree with that. We would see that situation. But for whatever reason, when it comes to this particular situation, we don't view it the same way. And it's just like, well, they just need to get out of the land. There's plenty of other Arab land for them to go live in. And it would be like, what if the British went to Hong Kong and said, when they had Hong Kong as their territory, and they said, all these Chinese people have got to go. Like, there's a bunch of Chinese land that they can go live on. Go live in mainland China. There's a whole mainland for you, a whole big region of Chinese. Go live there. This land is now going to be for the British, and we're going to make a British colony here with a bunch of white people. We never did that. That wouldn't be acceptable. But when it comes to this particular conflict, it is acceptable. But I think it became acceptable if people really read the history of it. The British actually at one point said, wait a minute, no. Like, we thought this maybe would be a good idea because it was our land, and so we kind of carved it out and gave it to you and sold you some land. But it turns out the local population's not down for this, and because of the things you're saying to them, which is you're going to take the land, so they don't like it, so we're not going to do it anymore. And then what happened? Terrorism happened. And the British were terrorized by the Zionists, who said, you're going to give this land up whether you like it or not. I mean, if people read all of this, that it wasn't just like some benevolent gift, but actually people were terrorized into giving it, maybe they'd have a different perspective. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are kind of two aspects to like why people just, the example you gave, which is, would strike anyone as absurd. Like, wait a minute, Russia or Germany colonize Italy? Like, of course not, and Italians would have every right to resist. But I think part of it is, well, it's not Europe, it's the middle. I mean, even though, Italians are sort of the Mediterranean countries are certainly like the kind of lower class of
Right.
Europe. The British and Germans kind of look down on like the Greek
Right.
and the Spanish and the Italians, right? But they're Palestinians are Arab Muslims, the hordes, the barbarians, and that's how Zionists saw them, because that's how Europe saw them. That's how the European powers saw them. Herzl, spoke openly of disdain of these, filthy people. So you have this kind of like anti-Arab, Islamophobic ideology going back to like colonial times, and then and I mean, of course, that's still very prevalent today. The way since 9/11, that was just
Yeah.
that was huge after 9/11, and people got murdered in the street. I mean, in Mesa, Arizona, close to where I'm from, I remember a Sikh guy got killed, and he was a clerk at a gas station. And he got killed because of they thought he was like a Muslim or an Arab, and no idea that he was. I think he was an Indian Sikh.
Right. Yeah. He wasn't even
so,
an Arab at all.
Right. Right, exactly. And like what's just happening now, you have Ron DeSantis saying, "I'm not going to let anybody from Gaza in this country. They're all anti-Semites, even the ones who aren't Hamas." And then,
Right.
I mean, this all of this like anti-Palestinian Islamophobic incitement, and then that 6-year-old boy, Palestinian boy, gets stabbed to death in Chicago, and it's like, wow, I wonder how that happened. I wonder if our
Yeah.
media and political, class have anything to do with it. So I think there's this kind of like built-in racism, and then on top of it, Israel has been very much able to monopolize Holocaust, and that gives
Hmm.
them the ultimate kind of moral card where you know it just becomes instead of a question of like, well, what is the power dynamic, what actually happened here? It's, well, we suffered the Holocaust, as if like the Jews who you know, Zionism was the answer to the Holocaust. I mean, it was Europe's answer in a way, but Europe was responsible for the Holocaust. Europe wanted to get rid
Right.
of Jews. Europe, I mean, the European powers largely collaborated in the Holocaust. And I mean, the real irony of it is the Zionist movement collaborated with Nazi Germany. David Ben Gurion, the labor Zionist movement, collaborated with Nazi Germany in order to advance the Zionist goals of having a so-called Jewish state. David Ben Gurion even has, I mean, there's the transfer agreement. It's called. It's Ha'avara. You can
Hmm.
look that up. That was basically about getting Jewish property to Palestine, making a deal with the Nazis. There were prominent Nazis that actually came to Palestine to inspect the land. They had a common cause, a common interest with Nazis, which was to make a Jew-free, a Judenrein Europe. That was a Zionist goal and a Nazi goal, 100%. And that went, not only did the labor Zionists collaborate with them massively and were totally complicit with the mass murder of Jews, but also even into when the final solution had already been decided and implemented in 1942, the revision, or sorry, the Lehi, the Stern Gang, which was of the three Zionist militias that went on to form the Israeli military after the founding of the state. The Lehi was the most radical of the three,
Hmm.
and it in the late 30s and early 40s, and again after the final solution was already being implemented and it was known, they were they were courting Nazi Germany, trying to they were offering to collaborate with them, to open a front in the Middle East against the British, because, as you said, they wanted to expel the British. That was the number one enemy. And they said, look, we will have a formal pact with Nazi Germany, with Hitler, and establish a totalitarian state in the very same model as fascist Italy or Nazi Germany. And that was not even accepted by Hitler. They got rebuffed, but they openly proposed it. One of the
Yeah.
signatories one of the signatories of one of the letters that went to like the Germans, was Yitzhak Shamir, or no, it was Menachem Begin, I believe, who became the prime minister in the 1980s of Israel. So, I mean, fundamentally, Zionism is a form of fascism, and I think that's what we're seeing right now. And I think in 50 years, we're going to look back. I mean, in the 1930s, fascism was not really seen universally as a dirty word. It was considered
Hmm.
a legitimate political ideology. What is it now? Of course, it's a dirty word, and we just, the left uses it to just call any right wing or any Trumper they don't like a fascist. So it's a dirty word universally, and I think in, I don't know how many years, 50 years, Zionism will be seen in the same way that Nazism and fascism will be, as we'll look back on this time and say, how did that happen? And there will be museums to the Palestinian heroes like Motaz Azaiza, and like Dr. Mohammed Ziara, and so many others. Those are just my personal friends, and we'll see them in museums as the heroes of their time. And Zionism will be in the dustbin of history.
Yeah, I think that's a real possibility. I do think that Israel has a problem that they need to deal with if they want to continue existing, and harmoniously in the world without having the world turn on them, and that, for their own survival, for their own existence. I think ending the racist, this sort of racism where it's because anybody would say, like, look, the idea of Nazi Germany was racist, right? I mean, this idea that they were going to create an Aryan race, that it was just going to be for these perfect people that were of one type, and that everybody else needed to get out. And they didn't just target Jews. It wasn't just a movement against Jews. They were targeting other groups as well. They wanted Germany to be German, and specifically just that. And we look at that and we say that's wrong. That's a wrong ideology. And we don't have anywhere else in the world where we accept that there are, of course, majority places, like majority Christian or majority Muslim or majority white or majority Japanese, right? There's like a majority, but we condemn like even the Japanese and how they tend to be extremely homogenous, and they don't really accept foreigners very well. We say that's racism. I mean, that's racism. They are highly protective of their culture and they don't want anybody else in. And we say that, well, it is what it is. I mean, they don't say you can't, but people that live there that are not Japanese, or even just the half Japanese people that live there, they say, they're not really accepted in the culture and in the community. And we point that out. We say it's wrong. And we hope that changes, So I agree. I think in 50 years, the world will have a different look at this and a different lens, a different viewpoint. I think we're already seeing that shift because the younger people, it seems that the younger the person, the more they look at this, and because they didn't have, my father's generation was born right after World War II. So they grew up with this, the Holocaust was a horrible thing. And we were the heroes that came in and helped people, and we were helping the Jewish people. And there's this, it's closer to the heart because my grandfather fought in World War II, so my dad grew up with his father had fought in this war, and my generation, our generation, as our grandparents fought in this war. But when you get further away, it's like I don't really know anything about World War I, nor it's my great grandfather fought in that war, but I didn't know him. I knew my grandpa who fought in World War II, right? So you kind of have this separation, and as the separation and the feelings shift, and I think we're seeing that with the younger generations, and it's only going to be more so that way. So I think we, as Western countries with Western values, should value no racism. Right? We should say that we want true liberal democracies that all people are equal, and we don't support any regimes that think otherwise. Would be the right path, but we're not on that path right now. Not at this moment, at least as a country, but as a people, things are shifting, right? That's what we're seeing for sure. So this has been really fascinating, Dan. Thank you for being on, and for your bravery, of being a person that goes to these various places, and that you're willing to put yourself in harm's way, and from rockets, right? You're willing to kind of step into those zones where there's rubble, and that's terrifying. I think it's also terrifying as a Jewish man to say I'm going to go and live amongst the Palestinians when there's been so much rhetoric of they're going to kill you. You can't go in there, and you clearly survived 3 years just fine amongst the Palestinian terrorists.
I mean, yeah. I mean, the times I felt dangerous was basically from Israeli soldiers, or
Yeah.
I remember one time when I was in Tel Aviv, I was in a taxi, and I'd just come out of Gaza, and I just kind of wanted to like see what the reaction would be. And this taxi driver, like when you're Jewish and you're a Jewish American, and you get, Israelis meet you. They're like, "Oh, yeah. Are you gonna move here?" They want you to join, right?
Right.
You gotta meet a Jewish girl here. And I said, "Oh, I just came out of Gaza," and the guy was just in shock. And he was an older guy, real sweet. And then he just turns in shock. And what he says to me, "If my son were here, he would kill you."
Wow.
And he's driving me around, taking me to my destination. And I said, "Really, your son would kill me?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, you think he should kill me?" And he said, "Yeah, if he were here, he would kill you." And I said, you talk like you're a you're a mean person, but you seem pretty nice. So like I don't really believe you. And he was like, oh yeah, yeah, and he just was obstinate. And I got out and gave him his tip, and and it was just like, I mean, that's Zionist mindset. And the times I felt in danger is when I was around basically Israeli soldiers or
Yeah.
Israeli, the right wing. Um, I was, always on guard, and that could have been bad. When I was in the demonstrations, like filming in the documentary, the demonstrations around by the fence in Gaza, where snipers are just picking off one person after the other. Can they tell I'm Jewish when I'm just standing out there as another guy and I had my beard grown out? No. So I mean that's scary times when Gaza is getting bombed and I'm there. It's scary, definitely. But
Yeah.
it was also a different time in my life. Now I'm a father, so I might do things a little bit differently. But you know, uh, I appreciate you very much, Kim, for being really brave and stepping out on this issue and just sticking to your principles and on so many issues. That's what I respect about you so much. So thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for having me on.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dan. Where can people find more of your? We're going to put all the links down below, by the way, of your documentaries, the three of them, and also anywhere else you would like. But is there anything in particular you want people to pay attention to, or where they can find your work?
Yeah, you can on uncaptured.media. That's my Substack. I'm publishing there. That'll take you there. You can follow my YouTube channel, Uncaptured Media, or better yet, my Rumble channel, which is I'm just getting active on. Basically, just this last week has really transformed my journalism. Just getting support from the public that I didn't have before. So it's
Yeah,
allowed me to basically I was a correspondent with Redacted, which is a great show, and I encourage everyone to watch it and support them. And I love Natalie and Clayton, who have supported me, and helped me grow for the past year. But I just have gotten so much support in the last week, amid this like genocidal onslaught, the week plus, that now I'm able to launch my own outlet, Uncaptured
great.
Media. So, if anyone wants to support, I'm really trying to grow this thing fast so it can really just turn into whatever go full capacity. So you can help me out on Buy Me a Coffee or on Patreon or on Substack. Yeah, just keep an eye on my Twitter. I'm very active there, especially lately at Dan Cohen 3000. And yeah,
Okay.
message me, DM me, email me. I'm happy to have the support. So yeah.
Well, I have all those links down below so you can follow Dan and support him and watch the documentaries. Highly recommend it. And really great work, Dan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Kim.
All right, guys. Well, that is it for tonight's show. That was definitely a fascinating conversation with Dan Cohen. And he is fundraising. I know he's fundraising for a documentary. He did post this out on his social media, and we'll have that link down below. You can help him do a third documentary in the Israel-Palestine conflict. And I think this time he says he's going kind of deeper into the Zionist side of things. So you'll definitely want to help him out on that documentary. Those links are down below. It'd be interesting. Definitely his work has been great so far. So we do have everything down below. Thank you so much for watching us, guys. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. We will be back again with another great show Monday, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. Until then, if you want to contact me, if you want to ask questions, give me some feedback, it's kim@kimiversen.com. And we will see you guys Monday. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.